The jaguars fight for survival. The return of the shadow cat. Imagine hiking through a remote canyon in Arizona and spotting a set of large paw prints in the mud. They look like they belong to a leopard, but here in the southwest US, incredibly, they just might. Jaguars, often called shadow cats for their elusive nature, are reappearing in places they haven't been seen for decades. Across their range, from the Amazon rainforest to the Mexican desert, jaguars are icons of wildness, and their fate in the 2020s tells a story of both peril and hope. In this deep dive, we'll explore why jaguars matter today, the challenges they face, and the innovative efforts to ensure this magnificent big cat continues to roam the Americas. Jaguars are not just any feline. They're the largest big cat in the Americas and the third largest in the world. With their muscular build and beautiful rosette-spotted coats, they inspire awe in ways few animals do. They also hold profound cultural significance. Indigenous peoples from the Amazon to Mesoamerica revere the jaguar as a symbol of power, a protector, even a deity. And as apex predators, jaguars play a key ecological role in keeping prey populations in balance. But despite their cultural and ecological importance, jaguars today are in a fight for survival. Let's start by looking at where jaguars stand now and why conservationists are both alarmed and optimistic about their future. Jaguar status and strongholds in 2025. Once upon a time, jaguars roamed from the southwestern United States all the way down to the tip of South America. Today, that range has shrunk by about half. Jaguars have been entirely wiped out in places like El Salvador and Uruguay, and largely so in the US. Outside a few adventurous males crossing the border, the species hasn't had a breeding presence in the US for decades. The global wild jaguar population is estimated to be on the order of 150,000 animals, give or take, a fraction of what it was centuries ago. And those jaguars are not all connected in one big group, but spread across 18 range countries, many in isolated pockets. Where are the jaguars' strongholds? Brazil is king when it comes to jaguars. Roughly half of all jaguars live in Brazil, thanks to two vast habitats, the Amazon rainforest and the Pantanal wetlands. The Amazon, especially the western and Brazilian Amazon, is the largest continuous jaguar refuge, a forested stronghold where thousands of these cats still prowl. The Pantanal, which spans parts of Brazil, Bolivia, and Paraguay, is the world's largest tropical wetland and holds the densest concentration of jaguars on the planet. In the Brazilian Pantanal alone, an estimated 3,000 to 4,000 jaguars live among the waterways and floating vegetation, including some of the biggest ever recorded. The Pantanal jaguars famously hunt caiman crocodiles and grow exceptionally large. These strongholds are critical breeding grounds for the species' overall survival. Elsewhere, the picture is more mixed. Mexico and Central America have jaguar populations, but smaller and more fragmented. In Mexico, intensive conservation efforts have actually led to some good news. Camera trap surveys in 2024 counted about 5,300 jaguars in Mexico, up roughly 30% since 2010. That rebound, concentrated in the Yucatan Peninsula's forests, has been hailed as a conservation victory, though jaguars there are still endangered. Across Central America, however, jaguars are in a precarious state. They persist in the remaining rainforests of Guatemala, Belize, Costa Rica, Panama, and others, but mostly in the hundreds, not thousands. Many of these populations are isolated in scattered protected areas like the Maya Biosphere Reserve or Costa Rica's Corcovado National Park. Northern Central America and the Atlantic forest of Brazil and Paraguay have some of the most threatened jaguar groups. Often only a few dozen remain in each patch of habitat. In short, jaguars today survive in a mosaic of strongholds: Amazon, Pantanal, parts of the Gran Chaco and Yucatan, connected by thinner threads of population, and those threads are fraying. Habitat loss, deforestation, fire and fragmentation. The number one enemy of the jaguar's long-term survival is habitat loss. These cats need vast territories. A single jaguar may roam a range of 100 square kilometers or more. Adult females often use approximately 40 square miles, males more than 50 square miles. When those forests or wetlands are cleared, jaguars lose the space and prey they require to survive. Unfortunately, across Latin America, agricultural expansion and development have been eating away at jaguar habitat for decades. Take the Amazon rainforest, for example. In the Brazilian Amazon, a zone called the Arc of Deforestation has been rapidly cleared for cattle ranches, soy farms and settlements. As the jungle is cut and burned, wildlife is pushed into ever smaller corners. Jaguar cubs, like little Jaguar, found orphaned in Mato Grosso after wildfires likely separated him from his mother, are dramatic indicators of this trend. The area where Jaguar was rescued is emblematic. Forests giving way to farms, with fires, often set intentionally to clear land, raging out of control. In places like this, jaguars are not only losing habitat, but also getting directly caught in disasters like wildfires. The Pantanal wetlands have also seen devastating habitat impacts. In 2020, record-breaking fires swept through the Pantanal, fueled by extreme drought and possibly human ignition. The scale was staggering. About a third of this vast wetland burned. Studies later estimated that nearly half of the Pantanal's jaguar population was directly affected by those fires, through loss of habitat or prey. Images emerged of jaguars with burned paws or jaguars starving because their prey base had been decimated. Normally, jaguars can flee fire, but 2020's inferno was so extensive that even the fastest, most elusive cats couldn't escape its impact. Climate change is making such events more frequent. The Pantanal's wet season has become drier, the dry season longer and hotter, setting the stage for mega fires in a landscape that typically would be swampy. This is a new kind of threat to jaguars. Fire was once a minor issue, but in an era of climate extremes, it's emerging as a real danger alongside the traditional problem of deforestation. Beyond headline-grabbing fires, everyday deforestation and fragmentation are an ongoing grind on jaguar habitat. Across the jaguar's range, forest cover is shrinking. In the Chaco of Argentina and Paraguay, woods are converted to cattle pasture at a rapid clip, isolating the few jaguars that remain there. In Central America, lowland jungles have been cleared for ranches and palm oil plantations, breaking what used to be continuous jaguar territory into disconnected patches. In Mexico, the last jaguars in northern regions like Sonora survive in a landscape checkerboarded by farms, highways and towns. Habitat fragmentation is especially dangerous for jaguars because it leads to small inbred populations. In the Atlantic forest of Brazil, for instance, only 200 or so jaguars remain in isolated forest islands, and scientists worry about genetic diversity loss. A tiny inbred jaguar population is at high risk of local extinction. Conflict with humans. When cows and cats collide. When wild habitat is converted to ranchland or farms, it's not only the jaguars that suffer. Humans and jaguars get drawn into conflict. Human-jaguar conflict is a major issue wherever people raise livestock near jaguar territory. A jaguar's natural menu includes over 80 species, from peccaries, wild pigs, and deer down to turtles, fish, or even monkeys. But a hungry jaguar won't distinguish a wild peccary from a penned pig or a free-ranging cow. Livestock are essentially easy prey. And for rural farmers, losing a cow or a few goats to a jaguar is a serious blow to their livelihood. As one conservationist put it, for many families, a cow is like a bank account. Losing one hurts their food and financial security. The result has been centuries of retaliatory killing. Across the Americas, ranchers have historically shot, poisoned or trapped jaguars to solve depredation on their herds. In fact, this was the primary reason jaguars were wiped out of the southwestern United States by the mid-20th century. Government hunters and ranchers killed any jaguar they could find to protect livestock. Even today, in places like the Brazilian Pantanal or the Guatemalan Petén, if a jaguar kills a cow, the typical response is for the rancher to hunt down that jaguar. These conflicts are tragic because they often eliminate breeding adults. A single rancher with a rifle can take out a jaguar that might have been the mother of cubs, or one of only a few left in the area. Reducing human-jaguar conflict is absolutely crucial for conservation, and there are innovative coexistence strategies emerging. One approach is better livestock management. For example, installing electric fences around pastures or corrals to keep jaguars out, especially at night. In some Brazilian communities, ranchers have started using guard animals, not just dogs, but even donkeys or certain cattle breeds that are aggressive toward predators, to protect herds. These guard animals can alarm and chase off a jaguar, preventing an attack. Another strategy is establishing compensation programs or insurance schemes so that if a jaguar does kill a cow, the rancher is reimbursed, removing the financial incentive for revenge. Several Latin American countries now have livestock loss compensation funds or are experimenting with them, though making sure they're well funded and reach remote ranchers is an ongoing challenge. Crucially, outreach and education are part of the solution. Programs that help ranching communities understand the ecological value of jaguars and that provide training on non-lethal deterrence have shown promise. In Mexico's Yucatan, for instance, conservation groups credit conflict mitigation efforts, like working with ranchers to corral animals at night and keep jungles intact around grazing areas, as one reason jaguar numbers have been able to creep upward. It's a slow process, changing mindsets, but there are more examples now where local people take pride in their jaguars rather than seeing them only as threats. The ultimate goal is to turn jaguars from liabilities to assets for local communities, perhaps through ecotourism or cultural value, which brings us to another human threat that has surged recently: the illegal wildlife trade. Poaching and illegal trade. Jaguars as the new tigers. One might think that hunting jaguars is a thing of the past, given that sport trophy hunting of them has been banned for decades. Indeed, after jaguars were included on cities, Appendix 1 in 1975, large-scale international trade in jaguar skins plummeted. For a few decades, habitat loss and conflict were clearly bigger issues than poaching. But in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a disturbing resurgence of jaguar poaching driven by the illegal wildlife trade. Wildlife traffickers have begun targeting jaguars as stand-ins for Asian tigers. As tigers in Asia became rarer and more stringently protected, black market demand shifted to other big cats. Jaguar body parts, teeth, skins, bones, even genitalia started fetching high prices, especially in China and other parts of East Asia. For example, jaguar canine teeth are sold as jewelry or amulets. A single large fang necklace can command hefty sums, and jaguar bone is marketed, without scientific basis, as an ingredient in traditional medicine, or as an aphrodisiac when ground into paste. Authorities have intercepted shipments of jaguar skulls and claws bound for Asia, and in local markets of Latin America, one can find jaguar pelts or teeth for sale, surprisingly openly. How big is the problem? It's hard to know precisely since a lot of it is underground, but clues have emerged. In Bolivia, a study estimated that about 60 jaguars were being killed each year in the 2000s just to feed the demand for their parts. In countries like Suriname and Guyana, there were reports of criminal syndicates poaching jaguars, boiling down whole carcasses to make jaguar paste, a glue-like concentrate of bones and tissues for export. Online marketplaces and social media have unfortunately become a new venue for this trade. Conservation researchers conducting multilingual searches from 2009 to 2019 found hundreds of posts advertising jaguar parts on platforms like Facebook and WeChat, often hiding in plain sight with code words or innocuous labels. In one analysis, jaguar teeth were the most commonly advertised part online, hundreds of teeth in total, with Mexico, Brazil, Bolivia, and China showing up as hotspots for these transactions. It's a stark reminder that the internet has globalized even the illegal wildlife market. What makes this trade especially dangerous is that it's often tied to organized networks. Investigations have revealed that jaguar traffickers frequently overlap with other criminal activities, including drug smuggling and illegal gold mining. In some cases, Chinese-run companies or individuals working in Latin America have been implicated in smuggling jaguar teeth out in bulk, leveraging shipping routes or even diplomatic pouches. This convergence with organized crime makes it harder to combat, but it has spurred international cooperation. Organizations like Panthera, WCS, Interpol, and national governments are collaborating to crack down on jaguar trafficking rings. For instance, Operation Jaguar, a project led by IUCN Netherlands, Earth League International, and others from 2018 to 2022, helped expose major smuggling routes in Bolivia and Peru, resulting in arrests of several top jaguar traffickers. Still, enforcement is playing catch-up. Conservationists warn that if demand for jaguar parts in Asia continues or increases, poaching could become a primary threat in the future, even in places where it isn't now. The jaguar is not yet as critically imperiled by poaching as the tiger, but the trend is worrying enough that all jaguar range countries have identified wildlife trafficking as a key issue to tackle in coming years. Connecting a continent, the Jaguar Corridor. Amid all these threats, one of the most ambitious conservation undertakings has been the creation of a Jaguar Corridor, a network of connected habitats stretching thousands of miles to keep jaguars roaming freely. The big idea is simple. You can't save jaguars by only protecting isolated pockets. You need to ensure they can travel, find mates, and maintain genetic health across the landscape. Jaguars, especially young males, can wander vast distances in search of territory. They don't know when they've crossed from Guatemala into Mexico or from one national park to another, and conservationists want to keep it that way by securing wildlife corridors everywhere jaguars live. In 2010, the wildcat conservation organization Panthera launched the Jaguar Corridor Initiative as a bold, range-wide strategy. Scientists had already identified around 90 important jaguar conservation units, core areas with breeding populations, and mapped out 182 potential corridors linking them. Imagine a map of the Americas with green dots, the strongholds, connected by green pathways, the corridors, weaving through human-dominated lands. These pathways might be riverine forests, mountain ranges, or relatively undeveloped ranchlands that a jaguar could slip through. The Jaguar Corridor Initiative's goal is to preserve or restore these linkages so that from northern Mexico all the way to Argentina, jaguars remain part of one connected population rather than isolated fragments. In the 15 years since, how has it gone? There have been victories and setbacks. On the positive side, several countries have expanded protected areas or created biological corridors that align with the Jaguar Corridor map. For example, Paraguay, Brazil, Bolivia, and Argentina recently announced a joint project to protect and restore nearly 1 million square miles of habitat along the Upper Paraná Atlantic Forest region, critical for connecting jaguars in that southern part of their range. All 18 jaguar range states have also been meeting under the United Nations and Convention on Migratory Species umbrella to coordinate jaguar conservation. As of late 2025, they agreed on a regional action plan that specifically emphasizes maintaining connectivity and combating trafficking. This kind of high-level cooperation is unprecedented. It's essentially an international alliance for the jaguar, often dubbed the Jaguar 2030 Roadmap. The fact that governments are talking to each other about linking habitats across borders is a big deal. However, keeping corridors intact is challenging on the ground. Many identified corridors run through private lands or across areas slated for development. Roads and dams can sever a corridor. One glaring example of a corridor under threat is in Central America. The narrow Isthmus of Panama is a choke point for jaguar movement between South and North America. Rapid deforestation in parts of Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama has pinched this natural bottleneck. Conservation groups are actively working there to establish corridor reserves and work with local landowners to allow jaguars safe passage. Another example, in Colombia, a proposed agricultural expansion could have closed off connectivity between jaguars in the Andes and those in the Amazon. But advocacy helped reroute projects and set aside lands for wildlife. The Jaguar Corridor is as much a concept as it is reality. In some places, it's working. Camera traps have documented jaguars moving through stepping stone patches that were maintained, while in others, it's aspirational and needs more support. But it remains the guiding vision for jaguar conservation. The logic is compelling. If we ensure jaguars can disperse and interbreed over large areas, we effectively future-proof the species by preventing inbreeding and allowing them to rebound in new areas if given a chance. Recolonization of the United States. One of the most intriguing and emotive jaguar stories of recent years is the prospect of jaguars returning to the United States. Historically, the southwest US, Arizona, New Mexico, even Texas and beyond was part of the Jaguars range. These borderlands cats were never as numerous as their tropical counterparts, but sightings of jaguars were recorded in Arizona as far north as the Grand Canyon up until the mid-20th century. By the 1960s, though, jaguars were essentially eliminated in the US due to predator control programs. For decades, it seemed jaguars were gone for good from the north. Then, starting in the 1990s and 2000s, a surprising thing happened. Male jaguars began to wander into Arizona from Mexico again. These were lone males. No females were present up north to start a new population, but they captured the public's imagination. Names like Macho B and El Jefe made headlines after being caught on remote trail cameras in the Sky Islands region of southern Arizona. In recent years, multiple jaguars have been photographed in the mountains just south of Tucson, indicating that Sonora, Mexico, which borders Arizona, has a small but breeding jaguar population sending explorers northward. In fact, one jaguar seen on camera in 2022 to 2023 was given an Indigenous Tohono O'odham name, signaling a warm welcome by the local nation, who view the jaguar as a protective spirit. This natural recolonization is exciting, but it's meeting a very modern obstacle: the US-Mexico border wall. Extensive border barrier construction in recent years, particularly segments in prime wildlife crossing areas, threatens to cut off those pioneering jaguars. In Arizona's San Rafael Valley, a critical corridor where jaguars from Mexico have been spotted, new 30-foot steel walls were erected in 2024. Biologists are alarmed that if these barriers continue, they could permanently block jaguars and other animals like ocelots, mountain lions, even black bears, from moving north or south. A recent study confirmed that existing border fences have already dramatically reduced cross-border movement of wildlife. Essentially, a solid wall doesn't just stop people. It stops jaguars in their tracks. Since they won't be able to jump or climb it, conservationists are now lobbying hard for wildlife-friendly solutions, like preserving some corridor gaps or using technology instead of continuous walls in key areas to allow animals passage. Some experts argue that waiting for natural return might not be enough and propose active reintroduction of jaguars into the southwestern US. In 2021, a study by a group of scientists and conservationists made the case that suitable habitat exists in Arizona and New Mexico to support a viable jaguar population, possibly up to 100+ jaguars in the rugged, remote mountain ranges and desert grasslands there. They pointed out that these areas have ample deer and javelina, peccaries, for prey, water sources, and much public land with low human population density. Crucially, they suggested that human attitudes had shifted since the 1900s, potentially making coexistence possible once again. Rewilding jaguars in the US would be a bold move, and not everyone agrees it's practical. US Fish and Wildlife Service actually rejected a petition in 2022 to start reintroductions, citing uncertainties like the lack of currently accessible female jaguars to start a population and the costs involved. Yet, the idea remains alive in the public sphere, a sort of if not now, when debate. It's a fascinating example of how conservation isn't just about preserving what we have, but sometimes about restoring what we've lost. For now, the immediate focus is on ensuring the handful of wild jaguars still coming up from Mexico aren't the last. That means maintaining connectivity across the border. The Southwest, as big cats, tribal communities and conservation groups are watching closely to see if policymakers will accommodate the needs of wildlife amid border security measures. The Jaguars saga in the US ties together so many themes: historical extermination, changing cultural values, and the literal barriers to wildlife in the modern world. In a way, it encapsulates the broader challenge and hope of jaguar conservation. New tools, science and innovation in jaguar conservation. Conserving a wide-ranging, elusive predator like the jaguar has always been difficult, but 21st century science and technology are providing new tools to help. One of the biggest game changers has been the proliferation of camera traps, motion-sensitive cameras that researchers set up in the jungle and leave for weeks or months, snapping photos of any animal that walks by. Jaguars, with their distinctive rosette patterns, are actually perfect candidates for camera trap surveys because each individual's coat pattern is unique, like a fingerprint. Across Jaguar range, scientists have deployed thousands of camera traps to estimate population densities and monitor where jaguars still occur. In Mexico's latest census, for example, over 900 camera traps were used in a coordinated effort across 15 states. Without that technology, such a massive survey would have been impossible. Now add artificial intelligence into the mix. Processing millions of wildlife photos can be painstaking for humans, but machine learning models are being trained to identify species and even individual jaguars automatically. There are AI programs capable of recognizing jaguars in camera trap images and distinguishing one jaguar from another by analyzing the pattern of spots. This means researchers can quicker identify if jaguar number 20 was seen 30 miles away a month later, building a better picture of jaguar movements and territory size. AI-assisted photo analysis is speeding up studies and could even power real-time alert systems. Imagine a future where a rancher gets a phone alert that a jaguar was photographed on the edge of his pasture last night, so he might want to secure his cattle today. Another high-tech tool in the jaguar toolbox is genetic analysis. By collecting jaguar scats or hair, scientists can extract DNA to figure out how related different jaguar populations are. Genetic studies in recent years confirmed that, despite the distances, jaguars have historically maintained gene flow from one region to another, reinforcing the importance of corridors. Genetics can also identify subspecies or distinct population segments that might need special protection. And in reintroduction projects like in Argentina's Ibarra wetlands, DNA testing is used to ensure that captive-bred jaguars are genetically suitable, for example, matching the lineage of jaguars that originally lived in that region. And we can't forget GPS satellite collars and movement ecology. Collaring jaguars is challenging. You have to safely live capture a jaguar first, but the data from even a few individuals can be incredibly illuminating. Collared jaguars have shown us how far they roam, what habitats they prefer, and how they navigate human-modified landscapes. For instance, telemetry studies revealed that jaguars often avoid open areas like big cattle pastures and tend to move along rivers or forest edges when crossing through farmland. insights like these help planners decide where a jaguar-friendly corridor should go. In the Brazilian Amazon, a young male jaguar named Jaguar, the orphan we met earlier, was fitted with a GPS collar upon his reintroduction, and researchers watched in awe as he travelled 14,000 hectares across the rainforest in a few months. Data like that not only tells us the scale at which a released jaguar can disperse, but also shows that these cats can thrive if given room. Drones, remote sensing, and AI-driven sound analysis to detect wildlife sounds in dense forest are other emerging tools being tested to monitor jaguars and their prey. Even machine learning on satellite images can help predict where deforestation might encroach next, or where fire risk is high, giving conservationists a chance to act proactively to protect habitats before they vanish. All these high-tech approaches bolster more traditional conservation work. They don't replace the need for boots on the ground, park rangers, community outreach, and anti-poaching patrols. But they make those efforts smarter and more effective. Perhaps most importantly, these tools help tell the jaguar's story to the public. A blurry trail camera photo of a jaguar padding past an ancient Mayan ruin, or a map of a jaguar's year-long journey across 3 countries can inspire the imagination and galvanize support for conservation in ways abstract ideas never could. Indigenous knowledge and cultural connections. Long before wildlife biologists and NGOs got involved, indigenous communities across the Americas coexisted with jaguars and wove them deeply into their cultures. In many indigenous worldviews, the jaguar is not just another animal, it's kin, teacher, or even a supernatural being. These cultural perspectives are increasingly being recognized as an invaluable component of modern conservation. For the Maya and Aztec civilizations, jaguars were symbols of power and were associated with deities of the night and the underworld. In parts of the Amazon, shamans are said to channel jaguar spirits during healing ceremonies. The jaguar is seen as a guardian of the forest and a mediator between worlds. The Guarani people of South America traditionally believed that jaguars protect sacred places in the forest. Closer to where jaguars are now returning, the Tohono O'odham and other Sonoran desert tribes view the jaguar as a sacred animal. When one reappeared in Arizona recently, it was honored as a homecoming of a spiritual protector. These beliefs have practical implications. An illustrative story comes from a Chinantec indigenous community in Oaxaca, Mexico. In 2004, after a jaguar killed many of their cattle, villagers set out to eliminate the problem cat. According to their account, when they confronted it, they were blinded by a brilliant light emanating from the jaguar. The elders interpreted this as a sign that the cat was Grandfather Jaguar, an ancient guardian spirit that must not be harmed. Instead of killing the jaguar, the community decided to capture it alive. They eventually released it back to the wild with a ceremony of apology and respect, asking the jaguar to spare their cattle in the future. This event, now known locally as the legend of the Jaguar of Light, transformed how that community saw jaguars, from enemies to respected neighbors. It also sparked one of Mexico's first community-driven jaguar conservation efforts, blending scientific monitoring with indigenous knowledge. Across Jaguar Range, many indigenous and local communities are becoming key allies in conservation. They often manage large territories that overlap prime jaguar habitat. In some Amazonian indigenous reserves, deforestation rates are far lower than outside. Effectively, these lands act as de facto wildlife sanctuaries, jaguars included. By supporting indigenous land rights and integrating traditional ecological knowledge, conservationists hope to strengthen protection for vast swaths of jaguar habitat. Moreover, involving indigenous rangers in wildlife monitoring has benefits. They bring tracking skills and a generational understanding of the landscape that complements scientific methods. In Belize and Guatemala, community-run camera trap programs have locals proudly competing to capture the best jaguar photos, turning former hunters into citizen scientists. Perhaps most importantly, highlighting the cultural reverence of jaguars helps shift public perception. Governments and the broader public may be more inclined to support jaguar conservation if it's framed not just as a biological issue, but as preserving a cultural heritage. Stories of the jaguar in folklore, art, and religion can foster a sense of pride and responsibility for ensuring the species survives. In education programs from Brazil to Colombia, teaching children about the jaguar often includes sharing indigenous legends and symbolism, helping the next generation feel a personal connection to the animal. In summary, the wisdom of those who have lived alongside jaguars for millennia is being increasingly respected. It reminds us that conservation isn't just about high-tech solutions and laws. It's also about values, ethics, and relationships between people and nature. The jaguar has been a teacher and symbol in human cultures. Now, humanity must show it has learned to respect its teacher by safeguarding the jaguar's future. Pathways to a future for jaguars. So, what does the future hold for the jaguar? Standing here in 2025, we see a species at a crossroads. On one hand, jaguars face an onslaught of modern threats. Their forests are shrinking, their wetlands are burning, and dangerous human hands reach even into the most remote jungles to traffic their teeth and pelts. Climate change is poised to layer on new challenges via droughts and fires. On the other hand, we have better tools and knowledge than ever before to address these problems. And we're witnessing inspiring successes, from jaguar numbers rebounding in Mexico to international alliances forming in the jaguar's name. There is cause for cautious optimism if we can leverage all this momentum. Actionable conservation priorities for jaguars moving forward are clear. First, protect the large core habitats, especially the Amazon and the Pantanal, which are the lifeblood of the species. That means tackling deforestation with stronger enforcement and sustainable development strategies, and ramping up fire prevention and response in a warming climate. International pressure and local incentives must align to curb the illegal clearing of forests. If we lose the strongholds, we lose the jaguar. Second, secure the corridors. Wildlife-friendly land planning, restoration of degraded areas, and mitigating barriers like roads, with wildlife underpasses, for example, are all part of keeping the jaguar corridor alive. Even politically sensitive barriers like border fences need creative solutions, removable sections, surveillance alternatives in key wildlife crossing areas, or else we risk permanently walling off genetic exchange. Another priority is doubling down on human-jaguar coexistence programs, expanding compensation funds, improving livestock protection, and helping communities benefit economically from jaguar conservation, such as through tourism or ranching certification programs for jaguar-friendly beef, can reduce the incentive to kill jaguars. The truth is, if living jaguars are more valuable to local people than dead ones, poaching and conflict will subside. We have examples to learn from. In the Pantanal, some ranches now host tourists on photo safaris to spot jaguars, turning the cats into a source of income. In Belize, former hunters are now paid jaguar guardians. These models need support and scaling up. Cracking down on the jaguar trade networks is also crucial. This involves better law enforcement, international cooperation to investigate trafficking rings, and working with China and other destination countries to eliminate demand, much like campaigns have aimed to reduce demand for ivory or rhino horn. Public awareness in Latin America about the newfound threat of poaching is important too. Many people, even authorities, didn't realize jaguars were being targeted again until recently. Strong penalties for jaguar poaching, combined with community informant networks, can make a difference in deterring would-be traffickers. On the science front, continuing to invest in monitoring and research will guide these conservation actions and measure progress. National jaguar surveys, like Mexico's, should be repeated every few years to track trends. New research might focus on how jaguars adapt, or struggle to adapt, to climate-induced changes in their ecosystems. For example, are jaguars shifting their range in response to drought or moving closer to villages during prey shortages? Understanding these patterns will help anticipate conflicts and habitat needs. And finally, education and cultural outreach complete the picture. If the next generation grows up valuing jaguars as an irreplaceable part of their natural heritage, they're more likely to support keeping jaguars around. The jaguar's image, once associated with danger or darkness in some folklore, is being rebranded as a symbol of healthy forests and national pride. Jaguar Day, celebrated on November 29th, is now an annual event in many countries, celebrating the species and rallying support for its protection. Looking ahead, it's inspiring to think that in 2030 or 2040, we might see a world where jaguar populations are stable or increasing. Former range gaps are being recolonized, and humans have learned to live alongside this apex predator without fear. Achieving that will require political will, funding, and cross-border collaboration on an unprecedented scale. But the groundwork is being laid. Each jaguar sighting in a new place, each cattle ranch that becomes coexistence-friendly, each law passed to safeguard habitat, is a piece of a larger puzzle coming together. In the dim light of a tropical dusk, somewhere deep in the Amazon, a jaguar lets out its cough-like roar. It echoes through the trees, a reminder that this is jaguar country. Our challenge and responsibility is to ensure that such roars continue to be heard, from the Brazilian wetlands to the mountains of Mexico, and maybe one day even in the canyons of the American Southwest again. The jaguar has survived ice ages, ancient hunters, and massive habitat shifts. With enlightened conservation and a bit of luck, Panthera onca will continue to reign as the enigmatic emperor of the American wild, a living testament to our planet's biodiversity and the shared commitment to protect it. Before we wrap up, it's worth recognizing just how many organizations are working on the ground to protect jaguars and the ecosystems they represent. Groups like Panthera are leading efforts to secure the jaguar corridor and reduce human-wildlife conflict across Latin America. The Wildlife Conservation Society, WCS, works across the Amazon basin to protect jaguar habitat while partnering with indigenous communities. In Brazil, the Instituto Onça Pintada has become a model for research, conflict mitigation and rehabilitation of injured jaguars. Conservation groups such as Rewild, Rainforest Trust and the Amazon Conservation Team focus on protecting the forests and wetlands that jaguars rely on, often by supporting indigenous land stewardship and fighting deforestation at its source. Even local grassroots organizations, like community-run monitoring programs in Mexico, Belize and Guatemala, play an essential role in keeping jaguars and their habitats alive. Supporting any of these groups directly contributes to the long-term survival of Panthera onca. And now I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the future of jaguars? Do you think reintroduction in the US is realistic? Which species would you like to explore next? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like the video. It helps this content reach more people who care about wildlife and conservation.